The rain fell in sheets on the old Michigan highway, the kind of deep country dark that swallows the headlights. It was after midnight. A lone trucker, his rig rattling on the wet asphalt, was just trying to make it home. He saw eyeshine first, low to the ground in the center of his lane. He slowed, assuming it was a deer, waiting for it to bolt. It didn't bolt. It stood up. The trucker's hands tightened on the wheel. This was no deer. It rose on two long digitigrade legs, unfolding to a height that seemed impossible, its silhouette blocking the entire road. It wasn't a bear. The proportions were wrong. Too lean, too athletic. The head was canine, a massive wolf's head, with a long snout and pointed ears. But the most terrifying part, the detail the trucker would repeat to a shaking state trooper an hour later, was the eyes. They weren't an animal's eyes. They held a calm, terrifying intelligence as they watched him. The creature took one deliberate step forward. The trucker didn't wait for a second. He slammed his foot on the gas, swerving his rig around the towering shape. In his rearview mirror, for a split second, he saw it turn its head to follow his retreat, standing motionless in the pouring rain before the darkness swallowed it again. This presents a terrifying puzzle. This man's story is not unique. It is one of hundreds, a chilling chorus of testimony echoing from the dark roads and deep woods of North America. What they describe is not the cursed man of European lore, but something else. Something that has been given a new name. The Dogman. How, in an age of satellites and surveillance, can a creature this large remain hidden? And why are the stories from Michigan to Texas all so chillingly the same? Before we continue this story, I want to ask you something. If you believe these dark myths, strange histories, and forgotten legends are worth remembering, if you believe the mysteries of our past should not be lost, you can help us continue this work by liking this video and subscribing. Your support keeps the candle lit and allows us to keep exploring the shadows. Tonight, we open the case file on the Dogman. We will trace the origins of this creature from a strange radio song that accidentally summoned a legion of witnesses. We will examine the most disturbing eyewitness accounts, the roadside encounters, the sieges at remote cabins, the stories from hunters who found themselves the hunted. This is not only the story of a monster, it is the story of the thin line between our world and the wilderness. It is the story of an ancient fear that has found a new, American form. To understand this modern nightmare, we must first travel back in time, to the strange night the legend was finally given a name. Welcome to the Midnight Archives. To understand the modern story of the Dogman, we must begin not in a dark forest, but in the soundproofed quiet of a radio station. The year is 1987. The place is Traverse City, Michigan, a town of clean, cold air, nestled on the shores of the Great Lake, surrounded on all other sides by deep woods that press in, seemingly endless. These are the ancient forests of the American Midwest, places where old logging roads dwindle into footpaths and then disappear entirely into a sea of pine and birch. Places where the nights are long and profoundly quiet. In a community like this, carved out of the wilderness, local radio is more than just music playing on a dashboard. It is a voice in the dark, a thread of connection that runs from town to town, farm to farm. It is a companion on the long drive home, a familiar presence when the snow begins to fall and the world outside the windows shrinks to the glow of a single lamp. At the station, WTCM, This connection to the community was the lifeblood of their work. This was an era before the internet, before the world was flattened by a global network of information. This was a time when local voices mattered, when the stories and concerns of a small town were amplified through the airwaves, becoming the shared experience of thousands. The radio was the town square, the general store, the pulpit, all rolled into one. It was a trusted voice, a constant presence that helped to hold the fragile tapestry of the community together against the vast, silent wilderness that was never more than a few miles away. The people of northern Michigan knew the woods. They respected its dangers, understood its moods. They knew the sound of a bear crashing through the undergrowth, the howl of a coyote, the sharp crack of a falling branch in the dead of winter. They were not a people given to fantasy. They were practical, grounded, their lives tied to the seasons and the soil. And it was into this world, a world of quiet pragmatism and deep-seated respect for the wild, that a new and terrible story was about to be spoken aloud for the very first time. On the air at WTCM was a disc jockey named Steve Cook. He was a man with a creative spirit and a flair for the dramatic, a storyteller who understood the power of a well-told tale. As April Fool's Day of 1987 approached, Cook wanted to do more than a simple, forgettable prank. He wasn't interested in a fake news report or a silly hoax. He wanted to craft something with staying power, something that would send a small, playful shiver down the spine of his listeners and become a part of the local conversation. He wanted to create a piece of local folklore. The idea was to take the fragments of ghost stories and strange encounters that are whispered in every rural community and weave them into a single, cohesive narrative. He drew on half-remembered tales he'd heard over the years, rumors of a strange creature seen near the Manistee River, whispers of an unusually large wolf that walked on two legs, and began to stitch them together. He decided a song would be the perfect medium. A ballad in the old folk tradition. A story set to a simple, haunting melody that could easily be remembered and repeated. He spent hours in the studio, layering the music, writing the lyrics in rhyming couplets, and carefully crafting his narration to sound like a genuine piece of Michigan history. He poured his creative energy into the project, treating it not as a joke, but as an authentic piece of storytelling. He named it simply The Legend. His ambition was to create something that felt real, something that listeners might, for a fleeting moment, actually believe. He wanted to give them a memorable April Fool's Day, a story they would talk about for a week or two before it faded into a fond memory of a clever radio prank. He had no idea that he was not creating a new story at all. He was simply giving a name and a voice to a monster that was already there, walking silently in the woods, just beyond the edge of town, waiting. The song Steve Cook created was a masterpiece of campfire horror. Set to a haunting, almost mournful melody, it told the story of a strange beast that stalked the forests of northern Michigan. The lyrics painted a series of chilling vignettes, each one a snapshot of a terrifying encounter. It spoke of French fur traders in the 1800s who saw glowing canine eyes watching them from the darkness beyond their fire. It described a team of lumberjacks who found massive, unidentifiable tracks in the snow around their camp. A key part of the legend Cook invented was the cycle of the creature's return. The song's most memorable refrain warned that every 7th year, the beast would emerge from the shadows to hunt again. The 7th year of the 70s, a farmer and his sons saw the creature in the fields and reached for their guns. The lyrics were simple, direct, and deeply unsettling. On the last day of March 1987, the work was complete. Steve Cook queued up the track. As the song's eerie melody began to drift out over the airwaves, he leaned back in his chair, a faint smile on his face. He imagined his listeners in their cars, in their kitchens, hearing this strange ballad for the first time. He pictured their confusion, then their slow realization that this was a prank, followed by a chuckle at the cleverness of it all. He was proud of his work. He had created a convincing piece of local mythology, a perfect setup for April Fool's Day. The song played out, its final ominous notes fading into silence. Cook waited for the reaction. He expected the phone lines to light up with amused listeners, people calling in to praise his storytelling and share in the joke. The studio was quiet for a moment. Then, a light on the telephone blinked, and then another and another. The phone lines did not just ring, they exploded. But the voices on the other end were not laughing. They were not calling to congratulate Steve Cook on his prank. The first caller was a man whose voice was low and trembling. He spoke not of the song, but of the creature in the song. He said he had seen it years ago, when he was a teenager, a towering fur-covered thing that had watched him from the edge of his family's farm before melting back into the trees. He had told no one, for fear of ridicule. Then another call came, this time from a woman. She tearfully recounted a story her grandfather, a logger, had told her. Of a night in the 1930s when a massive, dog-like beast had circled their camp on 2 legs, its eyes glowing in the firelight. Call after call followed. The voices were all different, men, women, young and old. But the story was the same. They sounded shocked, frightened, and above all, relieved. Relieved that they were not crazy. Relieved that someone else had seen it too. Steve Cook sat in stunned silence, the headset pressed to his ears, listening to a chorus of fear he had unintentionally unleashed. His fiction had collided with their reality. The carefully crafted details of his song, the bipedal stance, the canine features, the glowing eyes, were being repeated back to him, not as lines from a ballad, but as details from traumatic, lived experiences. He had thought he was telling a ghost story, but for dozens of people across northern Michigan, he was telling their story. He had reached into the collective unconscious of the region and pulled out a monster that was already living there. The prank was forgotten, replaced by a wave of genuine, long-suppressed testimony. The switchboard at WTCM was overwhelmed. The legend was no longer a song. It was a confession. It was an exposé. It was the moment a scattered, whispered phenomenon was given a name and a voice, and dragged out of the darkness and into the light of a radio studio. The night the song aired became a watershed moment. It was the first time these scattered, isolated encounters were brought together, forming a coherent and terrifying picture. From the flood of calls, a composite sketch of the creature emerged. This was not the werewolf of European folklore, a man cursed to transform under the moon. Witnesses consistently described what they believed to be a physical, biological animal. It stood between 6 and 8 feet tall, with a powerful, muscular torso like a man, but with the backward bending legs and massive paws of a canine. Its head was that of a wolf or a large dog, with a long snout and pointed ears. Its body was covered in coarse, dark fur, but the single most reported and unsettling feature was its eyes. They were not the flat, instinctual eyes of a beast. They were described, time and again, as intelligent, observant, and capable of expressing a cold, analytical curiosity that witnesses found more terrifying than any display of aggression. This phenomenon was not limited to the listeners of one radio station. A few years later, in the early 1990s, a journalist in Wisconsin named Linda Godfrey began investigating a strange series of sightings in the rural area surrounding Bray Road. The people she spoke to, farmers, bus drivers, respectable members of the community, had never heard Steve Cook's song, yet they described the exact same creature. They called it the Beast of Bray Road. Godfrey's methodical, journalistic approach brought the phenomenon a new level of credibility. Here was an independent, corroborating set of accounts hundreds of miles away that perfectly matched the descriptions from Michigan. It proved that this was not a localized hysteria sparked by a song. It was a wider, more persistent phenomenon. The song had not created the monster. It had simply, and accidentally, held up a mirror, allowing hundreds of people to finally see the reflection of a fear they had carried in secret for years. A monster had been given a name, and now that it had a name, it could be hunted. The legend was born in 1987. It was given a name by a radio DJ and confirmed by the testimony of frightened witnesses from Michigan to Wisconsin. But the archives suggest the creature itself is far, far older. The name is new, but the shape in the darkness is ancient. And to understand what stalks the woods today, we must look back, beyond the songs and the sightings, into the shadows of the ancient world, where the line between man and beast was drawn in blood and fear. The name Dogman was officially coined in 1987. This raises a critical question. Was the creature new, or was it simply a new name for a phenomenon that had been witnessed for centuries? To answer this, we must look beyond the modern reports and examine the historical record for precedents. The concept of a creature that is part man and part wolf is not a modern invention. It is a recurring motif found in cultures all over the world, stretching back to antiquity. This pattern of belief, known as an archetype, suggests a deep-seated and persistent human fascination with the idea of a hybrid that combines human intelligence with animalistic ferocity. The power of the modern Dogman sightings lies in how closely they match this pre-existing folkloric template. When a witness describes a 7-foot-tall bipedal canine, the story resonates not just because it's frightening, but because it feels familiar. It taps into a long history of similar stories that have been told for thousands of years. Therefore, to properly contextualize the sightings in Michigan and Wisconsin, we must first investigate this history. We need to determine if the Dogman is a truly unique American cryptid, or if it's the latest chapter in a much older global story. This investigation requires us to look at the myths of North America, the folklore of Europe, and the legends of the ancient world. By tracing these historical accounts, we can better understand the framework of belief that gives the modern Dogman phenomenon its incredible power. Before exploring European influences, it's essential to acknowledge the traditions of North America itself. The continent has a vast and diverse history of mythology, and many traditions include figures who can change shape or who blend human and animal characteristics. It's important to note that these are not the same as the modern Dogman, but represent distinct cultural beliefs. A common mistake is to equate the Dogman with the skinwalker of the Diné, or Navajo, tradition. The skinwalker is a specific figure, a human witch who has gained the power of shape-shifting through the practice of forbidden and malevolent magic. The belief is rooted in a cultural understanding of evil and the perversion of the natural order. It is not simply a werewolf legend. Other traditions also contain figures that, while different, touch on similar themes. The Anishinaabe tell of the Wendigo, a malevolent spirit of winter and starvation, which in some descriptions has gaunt, canine-like features. The Lakota people have stories of the Shungmanitu Thanka, which can be translated as a wolf-like being or spirit. These are not cursed humans, but powerful, often dangerous, supernatural entities that represent the forces of the wilderness. What these and other traditions show is that the concept of a powerful bipedal being with canine attributes was already present in North American folklore long before the name Dogman was ever spoken. These stories are not direct ancestors of the modern Dogman reports, but they established that the continent's original inhabitants also had a place in their cosmology for creatures that walk the line between the human and the canine worlds. When European settlers colonized North America, they brought with them a rich and often dark collection of folklore. Faced with a vast and intimidating wilderness, it is logical that they would interpret unexplained events through the lens of their own pre-existing beliefs. The most relevant of these was the legend of the werewolf. This belief was not monolithic. It varied significantly by region. In France, the creature was known as the loup-garou. Often tied to Catholic belief, the loup-garou was frequently a person cursed as a punishment for religious transgressions, such as failing to observe Easter for 7 years. This version of the werewolf was a tragic, often unwilling, participant in its own damnation. In the Germanic territories, the werewolf was more often a voluntary monster, a person who made a pact with dark forces or used magical items, like a special belt or salve, to achieve the transformation. This creature was a symbol of human choice and corruption. Further north, the Scandinavian sagas spoke of the Ulfhedna, or wolf warriors. These were not cursed men, but elite berserkers who, by wearing wolf pelts, were believed to channel the animal spirit to become ferocious, unstoppable fighters. They did not become wolves by magic, but by a ritualistic embrace of the beast's ferocity. These 3 distinct traditions, the cursed, the pact maker, and the warrior, formed a complex web of European belief about wolfmen. It is highly probable that these stories, carried across the Atlantic, provided a framework for settlers trying to make sense of the strange sounds and shadows of the American frontier. The howl of an unfamiliar animal in a dark forest could easily be interpreted as the cry of a monster they already knew from their homeland. The concept of a human-canine hybrid extends even further back than medieval folklore, appearing in the records of the ancient world. One of the most well-documented examples is the cynocephali, or the dog-headed men. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BC, described a tribe of men with dogs' heads as living in ancient Libya, presenting them as a factual part of the world's geography. This belief was remarkably persistent. In the 1st century AD, the Roman scholar Pliny the Elder wrote that the cynocephali lived in the mountains of India, where they communicated by barking and hunted with their claws. Centuries later, the explorer Marco Polo even claimed to have encountered them on an island in the Indian Ocean. In the classical imagination, the cynocephaly represented the barbarian, the savage and uncivilized human living on the farthest fringes of the known world. They were a symbol of humanity without reason, a creature that looked partly like a man, but behaved entirely like a beast. However, the dog-headed figure was not always seen as monstrous. In the pantheon of ancient Egypt, the god Anubis was depicted with the body of a man and the head of a jackal. Anubis held a vital and respected role as the guardian of the dead and the overseer of embalming rituals. He was a divine figure, a protector who guided souls into the afterlife. The contrast between the monstrous cynocephaly and the divine Anubis shows the deep duality of this archetype in the ancient human mind. The Dogman could be a symbol of either savagery and chaos or of sacred guardianship and passage between worlds. This demonstrates that the image itself has an ancient and powerful hold on human consciousness. The historical record is clear. Figures that combine human and canine features have been a recurring and powerful motif in human culture for thousands of years. From the cynocephaly of ancient Greece to the loup-garou of medieval France, and from the sacred traditions of Native America to the warrior cults of the Norse, this image appears again and again. While the specific stories and their cultural meanings differ, they all point to the existence of a shared folkloric archetype. This archetype represents the collapse of the boundary between the civilized and the wild, between human reason and animal instinct. The wolf has always symbolized the untamed, predatory forces of nature, while humanity sees itself as representing order and intellect. The wolfman is the embodiment of that order breaking down. The modern dogman phenomenon gains its strength from how perfectly it fits this ancient, established pattern. The stories told by eyewitnesses today do not exist in a vacuum. They exist within a long and rich tradition of similar tales. When someone reports seeing a bipedal canine on a rural road, they are describing something that aligns with a mythological template that has been part of our collective storytelling for millennia. This is not to say the sightings are merely imagination, but to recognize that the belief in and terror of such a creature is amplified because it taps into a pre-existing category of fear in our minds. The modern dogman is a new name, but it describes a monster that fits an ancient profile. The consistency of the archetype across so many unconnected cultures and time periods is what gives the modern sightings their profound and unsettling resonance. The historical precedents are clear. The figure of the man-wolf has been a part of human folklore since the beginning of recorded history. But history and folklore are not proof. They are context. To truly understand the modern phenomenon, we must turn from the ancient texts and the old legends and listen to the direct testimony of those who claim to have seen it in our own time. We must open the case files. The American frontier is not gone. It has simply changed its shape. The vast, unexplored wilderness of the 19th century has been mapped, measured, and crisscrossed by a circulatory system of asphalt and gravel. It is on these roads, in the deep rural spaces between the bright lights of our cities, that the modern frontier now exists. There are hundreds of thousands of miles of these roads in North America. They are the county lines, the farm-to-market roads, the logging tracks that wind through national forests. They are places where streetlights are a distant memory, and cell phone service is a hopeful fiction. On these roads, at night, the world shrinks to the twin beams of your headlights and the familiar, comforting hum of your engine. Inside the car, we are in a bubble of technology. We have climate control, music, a sealed container of steel and glass that gives us a profound sense of security. We move through the wilderness, but we are separate from it. We see the dark shapes of the trees, the occasional flash of animal eyes in the distance, but we experience it all through a windshield, like a film being projected for our benefit. This illusion of safety is one of the hallmarks of modern life. We have conquered the dark. We have tamed the wild. The car is a rolling symbol of that conquest, an armored shell that carries us swiftly and safely through places our ancestors would have feared to tread. But this sense of security is profoundly fragile, because sometimes, on that lonely road, the film stops. The barrier between our world and the wilderness dissolves, and something steps out of the darkness and into the headlights. Something that does not belong to any map, a creature from a time before roads, a living reminder that the frontier is still wild, and we are merely visitors passing through. It is in these moments of shocking, terrifying intersection that we find the most common and consistent type of Dogman encounter, the roadside terror. The first case file we will examine comes from a long-haul trucker, a man with 20 years of experience driving the nocturnal highways of the American Midwest. He was on a familiar route through the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, a stretch of road he had driven 100 times before. The night was clear and cold. His testimony begins just after 2 a.m. "I'd been driving for about 8 hours and the coffee was wearing off." You get a little hypnotized by the road that late at night, just the white lines spooling out in front of you. "I saw eye shine up ahead, maybe 200 yards out, low to the ground. My first and only thought was deer." It's the first thing you learn driving these roads. You see eyes, you slow down. So I eased off the gas and hit my high beams. I was expecting it to bolt into the woods, but it didn't. It just stayed there, right in the middle of my lane. As I got closer, I could see it was big, dark, and hunched over something. I thought maybe it was a bear dragging some roadkill. I was about 50 feet away when I realized the thing it was hunched over was a deer. And then it stood up. It unfolded in a way that just wasn't right. It wasn't like a bear getting on its hind legs. It was more like a man getting up from a crouch. But it kept going up. 7, maybe 8 feet tall. It was lean, but incredibly muscular. You could see it under the dark, matted fur. The legs were bent backward like a dog's. The arms were long, like a gorilla's, ending in these huge hands with what looked like claws. But the head, that's what freezes you. It was the head of a wolf, a timber wolf, but massive. It turned and looked right at me, its eyes glowing yellow in my high beams. There was no panic in its look, no fear. It just watched me. It was like it was curious, almost annoyed that I'd interrupted its meal. I was completely stopped at this point, my rig idling. For about 5 seconds, we just stared at each other. The intelligence in those eyes, that's what gets you. That's what I can't forget. It wasn't an animal, it was something else. It took one slow step toward my truck, and that broke the spell. I didn't even think. I just floored it, swerving into the other lane to get around it. As I passed, I looked out my passenger window. It was still standing there, its head turned, watching me go. I didn't look in my rearview mirror. I didn't want to know if it was following. Not all roadside encounters are passive observations. Some are far more aggressive, suggesting a creature that is not just seen, but is actively territorial. This next case comes from a young couple in rural Ohio, driving home on a winding back road after a late movie. Their account is from the autumn of 2004. "We were maybe 10 minutes from home, on a road we drove every day. It's heavily wooded on both sides, with a deep ditch running along the shoulder. We were coming around a sharp bend when something caught my eye. It was a flash of movement in the ditch to our right. I thought it was a buck, about to leap into the road. I yelled at my boyfriend to watch out, and he hit the brakes. But it didn't jump in front of us. It launched itself out of the ditch and onto the road behind us. It landed on 2 feet and just started running. We were doing maybe 35-40 miles an hour, and it was keeping up. It was horrifying. Its gait was this powerful, loping stride. It ran like a person, but it was built like a monster. It was huge, covered in dark fur, and its arms swung at its sides as it ran. We could hear it over the sound of the car. It was this rhythmic, heavy sound, but also a clicking, scraping noise. It was the sound of its claws hitting the pavement with every step. My boyfriend accelerated, and it accelerated with us. It was gaining on us, moving from the center of the road to the driver's side. It let out this sound, a low, guttural growl that felt like it vibrated the whole car. It wasn't a bark or a howl. It was a threat. It was right next to the driver's side window when it lunged. It didn't try to get in. It just sort of swiped at the car. We both screamed. There was this loud bang, like a rock hitting the door. Then it was gone. It just peeled off the road and disappeared back into the woods, so fast we couldn't even track it. We didn't stop until we were in our driveway with the garage door closed. The next morning, we went out to look at the car. There were 3 deep, parallel gouges in the driver's side door, right below the window. The metal was torn like it was paper. The final case file in this category represents the ultimate expression of roadside terror, the feeling of being completely and utterly helpless. This testimony comes from a woman whose car slid into a snow-filled ditch during a blizzard in northern Wisconsin in the winter of 2011. There was no cell service and no other cars on the road. My car was stuck. I tried for an hour to get it out, but the wheels just spun. The snow was coming down so hard I could barely see the tree line. I decided the only thing to do was wait for a snowplow, so I turned the engine on for a few minutes every half hour to stay warm. It was around 11 p.m. when I heard it. It was a crunching sound in the snow, heavy and rhythmic. It wasn't a deer. It was the sound of 2 feet. My heart started pounding. I turned on my headlights, but the snow was too thick to see more than a few feet. The footsteps stopped somewhere in front of my car, just beyond the light. I sat there in complete silence for what felt like an eternity. Then, a shape blotted out the light from my passenger side window. It was huge, just a massive, dark silhouette against the swirling snow. It was so close to the car, I could hear it breathing, these deep, slow, guttural breaths. I could smell it too, a thick, heavy smell, like a wet dog and something rotting. It moved around the back of the car. I heard the crunching again, right behind my headrest. It was sniffing at the trunk, at the seals of the doors. I was trying not to make a sound, not even to breathe. It felt like I was in a tin can, and a bear was trying to figure out how to open it. After a few minutes, it came around to the driver's side. It was so tall, it had to stoop to look in the window. And then I saw its face, just inches from mine on the other side of the glass. It wasn't a bear or a dog. It was both. The snout was long, the teeth were yellow, but the eyes were looking right at me. They weren't angry or frenzied. They were just looking, like it was studying me, trying to figure out what I was. Its breath fogged up the entire window. I don't know how long it stood there, maybe a minute, maybe 5. It felt like my heart was going to explode. Then, just as slowly as it appeared, it straightened up and walked away. I heard its footsteps fade back into the blizzard. I didn't turn my lights on again until I saw the plow an hour later. These case files, and hundreds of others like them, are more than just frightening stories. When examined together, they reveal a clear and consistent pattern of behavior and description that is difficult to dismiss as simple misidentification or hysteria. The first pattern is the consistency of the creature's appearance. Witnesses from different states, in different decades, who have no connection to one another, all describe the same animal, a bipedal canine of immense size, with a muscular humanoid torso and the head of a wolf. The second pattern is the creature's behavior. While it can be aggressive and territorial, as seen in the pursuit case, it is more often described as displaying a calm, watchful intelligence. The creature in the headlights and the creature at the car window were not mindless beasts. They were observers, calmly assessing a situation before choosing to act, or more often, choosing not to. This reported intelligence is perhaps the most unnerving aspect of the phenomenon. The final and most important pattern is the profound psychological impact on the witnesses. These are not people seeking attention. Many are seasoned outdoorsmen, truckers, and other pragmatic individuals who are deeply shaken and often permanently changed by their encounters. They speak of a feeling of wrongness, of seeing something that fundamentally breaks their understanding of the natural world. They describe a kind of trauma that goes beyond simple fear, a sense of having looked behind a curtain they never knew existed and seeing something they were not meant to see. It is this consistency in description, behavior, and psychological aftermath that elevates the Dogman phenomenon beyond a simple collection of monster stories. These are not random accounts of vague shapes in the dark. They are a cohesive set of data describing a single, specific, and unidentified creature, and the roads are not the only place it is being seen. The stories from the road are a warning. They tell of a predator that owns the night, a creature that watches us from the tree line as we pass through its territory. But what is more terrifying than encountering this beast in the vast, empty wilderness? Perhaps it's the realization that those lonely roads eventually lead home, and sometimes the creature decides to follow. For human beings, the concept of home is more than just a structure of wood or brick. It is a psychological fortress, a defined space of safety and control in a world that is often chaotic and unpredictable. The four walls of our home represent the absolute boundary between the civilized world we create and the wild world that lies beyond. Inside, we are the masters. We control the light, the temperature, the sounds. The lock on the door is not just a piece of metal. It is a powerful symbol of our dominion, a declaration that the dangers of the night may not enter. The stories from the road are terrifying because they represent a random, fleeting violation of our modern security. But the fear is temporary. The road continues, and eventually it leads home. This chapter is about what happens when that final sanctuary is breached. What happens when the monster doesn't stay in the woods, but follows the road back to your driveway? What happens when the footsteps you hear are not on the distant pavement, but in your own yard? The encounters that take place on a person's property are fundamentally different. They are not random. They feel targeted, personal. The creature is no longer a passive observer of a vehicle passing through its territory. It is an active intruder, crossing a line and challenging the very foundation of human safety. The fear is no longer of a chance encounter in the wilderness, but of being methodically watched, studied, and besieged in the one place on earth you are supposed to be safe. These are the stories of the trespass, the accounts of when the creature comes to the door. This case file comes from a family living on a small farm in rural Pennsylvania, miles from the nearest town. The witness, a father of two, provided the testimony. The events took place over a single night in the late autumn of 2009. I was woken up around 1 in the morning. I'm a light sleeper, and what woke me was the quiet. The crickets had stopped. The frogs in the pond were silent. It was a dead, heavy kind of silence that always puts you on edge. Then, my dogs started up. I had 2 beagles, and they slept in a kennel near the back porch. They weren't barking, not in the way they do when a coyote or a fox is nearby. This was a sound I'd never heard from them before. It was a low, guttural whining, a sound of pure terror. I got out of bed and went to the back window. I couldn't see anything in the dark. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were on the gravel driveway that runs around the side of the house. They were heavy, and there were only 2 of them. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It was the rhythm of a person walking, but the weight was all wrong. It sounded like someone well over 300 pounds was out there. The dogs were going absolutely frantic now, clawing at the door of their kennel, yelping. The footsteps walked the entire length of the driveway, slow and deliberate, and then stopped. A minute later, from out in the cornfield beyond the yard, I heard a howl. It wasn't a wolf. It was too deep, too powerful, and it ended in this almost human-like scream. It made every hair on my body stand on end. The footsteps started again, this time on the grass. They came up to the house, right up onto the wooden back porch. I could hear the boards creaking under the weight. They walked right up to the back door, and then they just stood there. I was frozen, waiting for the sound of the doorknob turning, waiting for the wood to splinter. My wife was awake by then, holding my arm, and I've never felt her tremble like that. After maybe 30 seconds of complete silence, the footsteps turned, walked off the porch, and faded back into the night. We didn't sleep again. The next morning, I went out as soon as the sun was up. The dogs were huddled in the back of their kennel, refusing to come out. And in the soft mud next to the driveway, there were 3 of the clearest tracks I've ever seen. They were huge, like a wolf's, but with a long, defined heel, almost like a human's. They were the tracks of something that walked on 2 legs. While some encounters are defined by what is heard, others are seared into memory by what is seen. This next case file comes from a woman in her late 50s, living alone in a small, remote cabin in northern Minnesota. Her testimony is from the spring of 2014. I'd lived in that cabin for over a decade. I was used to the sounds of the woods. I knew the difference between a bear and a deer crashing through the brush. This was different. It was a Saturday night, and I was in the living room reading. Around 10 p.m., I heard a loud snap from the back of the cabin, like a thick branch breaking. It wasn't just a sound. I felt the vibration through the floor. My first thought was that a tree limb had fallen on the propane tank, so I got up and went to the kitchen window, which looks out over the backyard. I had a motion sensor floodlight, and the sound had triggered it. The whole yard was lit up. At first, I didn't see anything. I scanned the yard, the woodpile, the edge of the trees. Nothing. I was about to turn away when I saw it. It was standing partially behind a large pine tree about 30 yards from the house. It was just standing there, motionless, watching the cabin. It was incredibly tall and dark, and my first rational thought was that it was a moose. But the shape was wrong. It was too slender, and it was clearly standing on 2 legs. As I was trying to process what I was looking at, it stepped out from behind the tree and into the full glare of the floodlight. I saw it perfectly. It was covered in dark grey fur. It was built like a bodybuilder, with these massive shoulders and long, powerful arms. The head was a wolf's, plain as day, with a pointed snout and tall ears. But it wasn't looking at the cabin as a whole. It was looking right at me, in the window. It knew I was there. We made eye contact, and my blood ran cold. There was this look on its face. It wasn't anger or aggression. It was curiosity. It tilted its head slightly, like a dog trying to figure out a strange noise. It felt like it was studying me, analyzing me. The intelligence in its gaze was the most terrifying thing I have ever experienced. We stood like that for maybe a full minute, just staring at each other through the glass. Then it slowly raised one of its long arms, almost like it was going to wave, before it turned with an incredible fluid grace and just walked back into the darkness of the woods. The floodlight clicked off, and it was gone. I spent the rest of the night sitting in a chair, watching that window, until the sun came up. The most intense encounters are those that are not fleeting. They are sustained, escalating events that feel less like a sighting and more like a deliberate psychological assault. This account details a 3-night ordeal experienced by a family of 4 who had rented a remote cabin in the mountains of Western Virginia in 2018. The first night was all about sounds. We'd put the kids to bed and were sitting on the porch when we heard howling. It wasn't coyotes. We've heard coyotes. This was a deep, single howl that seemed to come from the ridge right behind the cabin. It was powerful enough to make you feel it in your chest. Later that night, we were woken up by the sound of something heavy walking on 2 feet, circling the cabin. It never came onto the porch, just walked the perimeter over and over. It was unnerving, but we told ourselves it was probably a bear. The second night, it got physical. Around midnight, something slammed into the side of the cabin with a deafening bang. It sounded like someone had thrown a boulder. My husband grabbed a flashlight and looked out the window, but saw nothing. A little while later, we heard scratching. A loud, deliberate scraping sound on the wall of the kids' bedroom. Then, we heard the doorknob on the back door being rattled. Not just jiggling, but being turned back and forth, methodically, as if something was testing to see if it was locked. That was when we stopped trying to rationalize it. We brought the kids into our room and barricaded the doors with furniture. We were terrified. The third night was the worst. The circling started earlier, just after dusk. Then came the sounds on the roof. It was the unmistakable sound of something heavy, walking on 2 feet, right above our heads. It walked from one end of the cabin to the other, back and forth for what felt like hours. At one point, it stopped right over the main living room, and we could hear these low, guttural, almost conversational noises. It sounded like it was talking to itself. Then it started peering in the windows. We'd see this massive dark head appear in one window, then disappear, only to show up at another window on the other side of the cabin. It was systematically looking inside, taking inventory. It felt like we were rats in a cage, and a scientist was observing us. There was no doubt in our minds that it was intelligent and that it was toying with us. We stayed awake all night, huddled together in the dark. We didn't wait for sunrise. As soon as there was the faintest light in the sky, we threw our bags in the car and left. We never looked back. These case files, which detail encounters on a witness's private property, move beyond simple sightings. They provide a disturbing portfolio of behavior that implies a level of intelligence far beyond that of any known North American animal. When we analyze these accounts, several behavioral patterns emerge. The first is a clear sense of curiosity. The creature in the yard that triggers a floodlight doesn't flee. It steps out into the open and studies the person in the window. The creature that besieges the cabin doesn't just attack mindlessly. It systematically investigates the structure, walking the perimeter, testing the doors, and peering through the windows. These are not the actions of a simple predator. They are consistent with an intelligent being gathering information about a new or unusual element in its environment, in this case, the humans and their dwellings. The second pattern is a demonstration of territorial dominance. The deep howls from a nearby ridge, the throwing of rocks against a cabin wall, the act of circling a house, all of these can be interpreted as displays of power and ownership. It is a non-verbal communication that says, "This is my territory. I am aware of you. Your presence here is conditional upon my consent." This behavior is common in intelligent predators like wolves and bears, but the methods described, particularly the bipedal approach and the manipulation of objects like doorknobs, are unique and deeply unsettling. Finally, there is the element of psychological warfare. The sustained, multi-night siege of a cabin suggests a creature that not only understands fear, but is willing to use it as a tool. The act of walking on a roof or rattling a doorknob serves no direct predatory purpose. Its primary function is to terrorize and assert dominance over the occupants inside. These home-based encounters paint a chilling portrait of a creature that is not just a part of the wilderness, but is an active and intelligent investigator of the human world where it encroaches upon its domain. It is one thing to be stalked inside a fortress of wood and glass, with a locked door between you and the thing in the dark. But what happens when there are no walls to hide behind? What happens when you meet this creature on its own terms, deep in the wild places where it is the master and you are the trespasser? There is a fundamental difference between a road and a trail. A road is a declaration of human intent, a strip of order laid over the chaos of nature. A trail is a suggestion, a concession. When you step off the asphalt and onto the earth, you are agreeing to a different set of rules. The farther you walk, the more your modern advantages fall away. Your cell phone loses its signal. The sound of traffic is replaced by the sound of the wind. The safety of walls and locks is replaced by a thin layer of nylon and your own vigilance. This is the primal fear of the deep woods, a fear that is not learned, but inherited. It is the genetic memory of a time when we were not the masters of our environment, when the snap of a twig in the darkness was a matter of life and death. In our modern lives, we seek out this experience. We call it recreation, a chance to reconnect with nature. But what we are truly doing is stepping back into a world where we are no longer at the top of the food chain. We are slower, weaker, and have poorer senses than most of the animals we share the forest with. We are guests in a kingdom that is not our own. The following case files come from this world. They are the stories of experienced hikers, campers, and hunters, people who are comfortable in the wilderness, who know its rhythms and respect its inhabitants. Their testimony is powerful because they are not easily fooled or frightened. They know what a bear looks like, they know what a coyote sounds like, and they are all certain that what they encountered was neither. These are the stories of what happens when you meet the creature in its own home, where it holds every advantage and where you are the trespasser. This account comes from a man who was an avid backpacker with years of experience in solo trekking. In the summer of 2016, he embarked on a 4-day hike along a remote section of the Appalachian Trail in northern Georgia. The first day was uneventful. It was the second day when things started to feel off. It began with the feeling of being watched. Every hiker gets it from time to time, but this was different. It was persistent, a heavy feeling on the back of my neck that wouldn't go away. I'd stop and stand perfectly still, listening, but I never heard anything. I told myself it was just the isolation getting to me. That evening, I made camp, and the feeling subsided. But the next morning, about an hour after I started hiking, I heard it. It was the sound of footsteps, just inside the tree line to my right. They were heavy, and they were bipedal. I stopped walking. The footsteps stopped. I started again, walking faster. The footsteps matched my pace. I was in a section of the trail that was thick with undergrowth, so I couldn't see what was making the sound. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" The only answer was silence. I kept hiking, my hand on my bear spray, my heart hammering in my chest. This went on for 2 hours. Step for step, it shadowed me. Twice, I heard a thick branch snap at a height far too high for a person or a bear. It felt like it was deliberately making noise now, letting me know it was there. The terror was in the intelligence of it. A bear would have crashed through the brush or lost interest. This thing was methodical. It was stalking me. I finally came to a clearing with a small stream. On the other side of the stream, pressed into the mud, was a single, perfect track. It was canine, but the sheer size was staggering. It was at least twice as big as any wolf track I'd ever seen, and it had a long, defined heel, like a human foot. Seeing that track broke me. This wasn't in my head. I abandoned my planned route. I didn't stop to make camp. I hiked the remaining 12 miles to the nearest access road through the night, barely using my headlamp, terrified of what it might attract. I never heard the footsteps again, but I never lost the feeling that I was being watched, escorted out of its territory. Hunters are, by their nature, trained observers. They spend countless hours in silence, learning to distinguish the subtle sounds and movements of the forest. This credibility is what makes the following testimony from a deer hunter in Wisconsin so compelling. The account is from November of 2012. I was in my tree stand, about 15 feet up a large oak, overlooking a clearing. It was the last hour of daylight, that quiet, magical time when the woods come alive. I'd been sitting motionless for nearly 3 hours. I was watching a couple of does at the far end of the clearing when they suddenly snapped their heads up, looked to my left, and then bolted. I knew something was coming. I slowly raised my rifle, expecting to see a big buck or maybe a coyote. What stepped out of the brush was neither. My first thought, for just a split second, was bear. But my brain immediately rejected it. It moved with a fluid, silent grace that no bear possesses. It walked on two legs, not awkwardly, but with a natural, powerful gait. It was at least 7 feet tall, and its upper body was incredibly muscular, with broad shoulders and long arms. It was covered in thick, dark brown fur. It took a few steps into the clearing and just stood there, surveying the area. Its head was exactly like a timber wolf's, with a long snout and pointed ears that swiveled independently, listening. It wasn't frantic or aggressive. It was calm, confident. It moved like something that knew it was the most dangerous thing in the woods. I just sat there, frozen, not daring to breathe. My rifle was in my hands, but the thought of using it felt absurd. It felt like bringing a knife to a gunfight. This thing was out of a different reality. It sniffed the air, its head held high. Then it began to walk slowly across the clearing, directly towards my tree. My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. It stopped directly underneath my stand. For a moment, it just stood there, sniffing at the base of the tree. And then, very slowly, it tilted its head back and looked straight up at me. Our eyes met. They were a pale, yellowish color, and they were shining with a terrifying, cold intelligence. There was no doubt in my mind that it knew I was there the entire time. It knew, and it didn't care. It held my gaze for what felt like a minute. Then it gave a low, quiet huff, a sound of dismissal, and turned. It walked back the way it came and disappeared into the brush as silently as it had arrived. I stayed in that stand until it was pitch black, shaking too hard to climb down. Our final wilderness case file details an encounter that moves beyond stalking and observation into direct confrontation and intimidation. The account comes from two brothers who were camping at a remote backcountry site in the Allegheny National Forest in 2019. We'd set up camp by a creek, miles from any road. As dusk settled, the woods went quiet. Not the normal quiet, but an unnatural, dead silence. Even the insects stopped chirping. That was the first sign that something was wrong. We had a good fire going, and we were cooking dinner when we heard the first growl. It wasn't a bear. It was a deep, resonant growl that seemed to come from all around us and vibrate right through the ground. We grabbed our flashlights and scanned the darkness beyond the fire, but we couldn't see anything. About 10 minutes later, a rock about the size of a fist came flying out of the darkness and landed in the dirt just a few feet from the fire. We jumped up, yelling into the woods, trying to sound tougher than we were. That's when we saw it. The beam of my flashlight caught the silhouette of something huge moving between the trees, maybe 40 yards out. It was on two legs. It would move from one tree to another, stop, and then move again, circling us, always staying just at the edge of the light. We could hear it breathing, these deep, heavy breaths. It was clearly toying with us, letting us know it was there, that it was in control. The fear was suffocating. We threw more wood on the fire, trying to make it as big as possible. We decided to get into the tent, thinking maybe it would lose interest. As soon as we were inside, the real terror began. We heard it step into the clearing. We could hear its heavy footsteps on the leaves, walking right up to our tent. It was so close we could smell it, a foul, musky, wet dog odor. It let out another growl, right outside the tent wall, a sound so powerful It felt like a punch to the chest. We were screaming at it to get away. Then, it let out a full-blown roar. It wasn't a howl. It was a sound of pure, explosive aggression. It charged. We heard it crashing toward us, and we were certain it was going to tear right through the tent. It stopped just short, maybe a foot from the tent wall. We heard it snort, a loud, angry exhalation of breath. Then it turned and walked away. We heard its footsteps retreat back into the woods. We spent the rest of the night with a knife in our hands, waiting for it to come back. It never did. At first light, we left everything, the tent, our gear, everything, and we just ran. The encounters described in the deep wilderness represent the most alarming category of Dogman testimony. When we analyze the behaviors reported by these credible, experienced witnesses, we are left with a portrait of a creature that exhibits all the characteristics of a highly successful, unclassified apex predator. The account of the stalked hiker demonstrates a mastery of its environment. The creature displayed immense stealth, the ability to shadow a human for hours without being clearly seen, and the intelligence to use the terrain to its advantage. This is the behavior of a thinking, calculating hunter, not a simple beast. The tree stand encounter reveals a creature with a stunning lack of fear. In a situation where it was being observed by an armed human, it displayed not caution, but calm confidence and curiosity. The fact that it knew the hunter was there and chose to reveal itself suggests a creature that does not view humans as a threat, a terrifying reversal of the natural order we take for granted. Finally, the campsite invasion demonstrates the strategic use of intimidation and psychological warfare. The circling, the throwing of objects, the growls, and the final, terrifying bluff charge are all tactics designed to terrorize and dominate. They serve to establish control over a territory and drive off intruders without the need for a direct physical attack. Taken together, these behaviors, advanced stalking, lack of fear, and strategic intimidation, are not indicative of a lost or confused animal. They point to a highly intelligent predator that is perfectly adapted to the wilderness, fully aware of its own capabilities, and confident in its position at the very top of the food chain. If these accounts are accurate, then the creature they describe is perhaps the most formidable predator in North America, one that combines the physical power of a great bear with the cunning intelligence of something far closer to ourselves. The stories are consistent, the fear is real, the witnesses, often experienced outdoorsmen, are credible. We have now heard the testimony from the road, from the home, and from the heart of the wilderness. The question is no longer what people are seeing. The question is, what is it? Is it flesh and blood, a trick of the mind, or something else entirely? To answer that, we must turn from testimony to evidence. The eyewitness testimony is complete. We have heard the stories from the road, from the home, and from the deep wilderness. They form a chilling and remarkably consistent mosaic of a creature that, by all accounts, should not exist. But stories, no matter how numerous or compelling, are not the same as proof. We now move from the realm of testimony into the more demanding world of evidence. In the field of cryptozoology, the discipline that seeks to find animals unknown to science, there is a concept known as the burden of proof. The burden rests entirely on those who claim the unknown creature exists. To prove the existence of a new species as large and significant as the Dogman, the scientific community would require irrefutable physical evidence. The gold standard is a type specimen, a body, living or dead, that can be studied, dissected, and genetically sequenced. Short of a body, the next best evidence would be unambiguous DNA from a reliable source, hair, blood, or tissue that can be tested and shown to belong to no known animal. Failing that, the evidence would need to be in the form of extremely clear, high-resolution photographs or video footage from multiple angles and with clear reference for scale that can withstand intense forensic scrutiny. What we have instead is something else. The evidence for the Dogman exists in a grey area, a world of shadows and static. It consists of grainy footage of disputed origin, distorted audio recordings from the night, and plaster casts of strange tracks left in the mud. It is evidence that is deeply compelling to believers and easily dismissed by skeptics. To conduct a proper investigation, we must examine these artifacts with a critical eye. We must acknowledge their flaws and their potential, and weigh them against the more conventional explanations that science provides. The question is not whether the stories are frightening. The question is whether the evidence that supports them can bear the immense weight of the burden of proof. Of all the artifacts in the Dogman file, none has been more influential or more deceptive than the piece of footage known as the Gable Film. For years, it was presented as the potential smoking gun, a grainy, terrifying glimpse of the creature in action. The film, supposedly an 8mm home movie from the 1970s, showed a quiet family outing, interrupted by a massive, fur-covered creature that burst from the woods, running first on two legs and then dropping to all fours in a predatory charge. When it first surfaced on the internet, it came with a compelling, tragic story of a lost family and a piece of forgotten footage, adding to its mystique. The film spread like wildfire through the burgeoning online cryptozoology community, and for many, it became the definitive image of the Dogman. For years, the film was a cornerstone of the phenomenon, fiercely debated by believers and skeptics alike. But the truth, when it finally emerged, was far more mundane and in some ways, far more interesting. In 2010, a man named Mike Agrusa came forward. He was the filmmaker. He confirmed what skeptics had long suspected. The Gable Film was a deliberate and brilliantly executed hoax. Agrusa revealed he had shot the footage in 1999, not the 1970s, and that the creature was simply a friend wearing a commercially available ghillie suit, modified for the part. The entire Gable backstory was a fiction he had created to make the video more believable. But to dismiss the Gable Film as just a hoax is to miss its true significance. The film is a perfect case study in the creation and power of modern folklore. Its success was not accidental. First, it tapped into a pre-existing narrative. The legend of the Michigan Dogman was already well established, and the film provided a visual for a story people already wanted to believe. Second, it used a trusted format. The shaky, low-quality 8mm aesthetic was powerfully reminiscent of the famous Patterson-Gimlin Bigfoot film, a visual language that audiences already associated with authentic paranormal footage. Finally, and most importantly, it gave a face to a faceless fear. Before the Gable Film, the Dogman was a collection of verbal descriptions. Afterward, it was a specific, terrifying image. a loping, aggressive predator. The Gable Film, therefore, is not evidence of a physical creature, but it is undeniable proof of the power of a story. It demonstrates how a single, well-crafted piece of fiction can shape and solidify a modern myth, becoming more influential than any genuine testimony ever could be. It reminds us that sometimes the most compelling monsters are the ones we create ourselves. With the most famous piece of visual evidence confirmed as a fabrication, we are left with other, more ambiguous traces. The auditory evidence presents a fascinating and complex challenge, perfectly illustrating how the lines between modern legends can blur. This category consists of numerous recordings, captured by witnesses or trail cameras, that are purported to be the vocalizations of unknown creatures. Perhaps the most famous and chilling of these is a recording from 1994 known as the Ohio Howl. The sound is undeniably terrifying. It begins with a deep guttural roar before rising into a long, powerful howl that seems to carry for miles. Its complexity and volume have made it a legendary piece of audio in the world of cryptozoology. But here, the case file becomes complicated and reveals a great deal about how modern myths are constructed. While this recording is often shared in Dogman discussions as potential evidence, its official origin lies elsewhere. It was recorded in Columbiana County, Ohio, and is catalogued by the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, the BFRO, as a Class A potential Sasquatch vocalization. This fact is profoundly significant. It demonstrates how a powerful but ambiguous piece of evidence can become detached from its original context and be absorbed into multiple, separate legends. The sound is so strange, so primal, and so difficult to identify that both the Bigfoot and Dogman research communities have pointed to it as potential proof of their respective creatures. It has become a kind of free-floating artifact of the unknown, its meaning shaped by the listener. To one person, the deep roar sounds primate-like. To another, the long concluding howl sounds distinctly canine. This highlights the subjective nature of interpreting such evidence. A listener often hears what their beliefs have primed them to hear. Therefore, while recordings like the Ohio Howl prove that there are strange and unsettling sounds in the woods, they cannot be used as definitive proof of one specific creature over another. They are, in essence, an auditory Rorschach test, a shadow in the static onto which we project the shape of our chosen monster. The second category is physical trace evidence, primarily in the form of footprints. Over the years, dozens of plaster casts have been made of large, anomalous tracks found in areas of Dogman sightings. These tracks are consistently described as canine in nature, but with several key differences from known wolf or dog prints. They are significantly larger, often measuring between 10 and 14 inches in length. More importantly, they frequently display what appears to be an elongated heel pad, an indication of a plantigrade or semi-plantigrade foot structure, which is necessary for stable bipedal walking. This contrasts with the digitigrade foot of a normal dog, which walks on its toes. Proponents argue that these tracks are physical proof of a large bipedal canine. Skeptics counter that most single tracks are unreliable. A track can be distorted by the substrate it is left in. Mud can spread, snow can melt and refreeze, making a normal wolf track appear larger and stranger than it is. Furthermore, without a clear trackway, a series of multiple sequential prints that would show the creature's gait and stride. A single print is of limited value and could be a deliberate hoax. Like the audio recordings, the tracks are a tantalizing piece of a puzzle, but one that lacks the definitive clarity needed for scientific proof. Faced with a lack of conclusive physical evidence, we must turn to the most rational and scientifically plausible explanation for the Dogman phenomenon, that the sightings are misidentifications of known animals, filtered through the lens of human fear and expectation. This theory does not dismiss the sincerity or the terror of the witnesses. It instead seeks to explain their experience within the known boundaries of biology and psychology. The most common candidate for misidentification is the American black bear. A large male black bear can weigh over 500 pounds and stand over 7 feet tall on its hind legs. They frequently stand up to get a better view or to intimidate a rival, and in this bipedal stance, their profile can be shockingly humanoid. In poor light, from a distance, or in a moment of panic, a witness could easily mistake the erect, powerful form of a bear for a different kind of bipedal creature. A bear with an elongated snout, or one seen in profile, could easily be perceived as having a canine-like head. The second major candidate is a large canid, a grey wolf, a coyote, or even a large domestic dog, suffering from a severe case of sarcoptic mange. This parasitic skin disease has a devastating effect on an animal's appearance. It causes extreme hair loss, leaving patches of raw, thickened, and darkened skin. The animal becomes emaciated, its bones and ribs clearly visible. The result is a creature that looks skeletal, alien, and deeply unnatural. A large grey wolf, which can already stand over 3 feet at the shoulder, would look terrifyingly tall and lankier if it were stripped of its fur and suffering from mange. To a witness who has never seen the disease before, such an animal would look like a monster from a nightmare, a perfect match for some aspects of a Dogman report. Finally, we must consider the powerful role of human psychology. A person driving alone on a dark road is already in a heightened state of alert. If they have been exposed to the Dogman legend, whether from a song, a movie, or the internet, their brain is psychologically primed to interpret an ambiguous stimulus as the thing they already fear. Fear, adrenaline, and darkness are powerful distorters of perception. While misidentification is the most likely explanation, it does not satisfy all believers, particularly those who have had clear, close-range sightings. For them, what they saw was undeniably a real, physical creature unknown to science. This leads to the primary cryptozoological theory, that the Dogman is a flesh and blood, unclassified species. This theory posits that a small, relict population of either a giant, bipedal canine or a type of North American primate has survived in the vast, sparsely populated wilderness areas of the continent. Proponents of this view argue that the history of zoology is filled with examples of animals that were once considered myths before being officially discovered. The gorilla was just a fireside tale told by African tribes until the mid-19th century. The okapi, a relative of the giraffe, was unknown to Western science until 1901. The massive coelacanth fish was thought to have gone extinct with the dinosaurs until a living specimen was caught in 1938. These discoveries prove that large, remarkable animals can and do remain hidden from science in the modern age. The sheer vastness of the forests in North America, they argue, could easily hide a small, intelligent, and elusive population of predators. Beyond the biological hypothesis, we enter the realm of the paranormal. This final set of theories attempts to account for the high strangeness aspects of some encounters that a flesh and blood explanation cannot easily accommodate. Some witnesses report the creature's eyes glowing a bright, self-illuminating red, not the passive reflection of eyeshine. Others describe the creature appearing and disappearing with an unnatural silence, or report a powerful, oppressive feeling of psychic dread that precedes the actual sighting. These details have led some researchers to speculate that the Dogman is not a biological animal at all. Theories in this category range widely. Some suggest it is a supernatural entity, a nature spirit, or elemental, protecting its territory from human encroachment. Others propose it could be a dimensional being, momentarily phasing into our reality from another. A more psychological but still paranormal theory is that of the tulpa, or thought form, a creature that is literally willed into existence by the focused, collective belief of a large number of people. In this view, the 1987 song and the subsequent spread of the legend on the internet created the psychic energy necessary for the creature to manifest. These theories, while impossible to prove, persist as an attempt to explain the aspects of the phenomenon that seem to defy the laws of the natural world. We have compelling stories but no body. We have strange tracks but no definitive proof. We have theories that range from the mundane to the metaphysical. We are left in a state of profound uncertainty, adrift in a sea of testimony without a clear landmark of truth. So after examining the case files and the evidence, where does that leave us? To close the file, we must confront the final unsettling possibility that the answer may lie not in the woods, but within ourselves and the nature of belief itself. We have followed the trail of this modern American monster to its end. We began with a strange song that echoed through a Michigan night and unlocked a flood of hidden testimony. We journeyed back through the centuries, finding the creature's shadow in the myths of the ancient world and the folklore of the old. We have opened the case files, listening to the stark, terrifying accounts of credible witnesses from the lonely backroads, from the sanctity of their own homes, and from the deep, primal wilderness where man is not the master. Finally, we have sifted through the meager and controversial evidence, the grainy films, the distorted howls, the anomalous tracks, and weighed the theories from the mundane to the extraordinary. And now, at the end of this long investigation, we are left not with an answer, but with a profound and frustrating paradox. On one side, we have a mountain of anecdotal evidence, hundreds, perhaps thousands of eyewitness accounts, gathered over decades and across a continent, all telling a remarkably consistent story of the same impossible creature. On the other side, we have a complete and total absence of the scientific proof required to confirm a new species. There is no body, no undisputed DNA, no clear photograph that can withstand scrutiny. The trail has gone cold. We are left standing at the edge of the woods, with the chilling stories of what lies within, but no way to prove it. The case file is filled with testimony, but the final page, the one that should contain the conclusion, remains blank. So where does the truth lie? As the trail of evidence fades, perhaps we must look not at the creature itself, but at what it reflects back at us. Whether the Dogman is a real animal or not, it has undeniably become a powerful symbol for our time, a modern monster that embodies distinctly modern anxieties. In an age of unprecedented environmental change, where the wilderness feels both shrinking and increasingly volatile, the Dogman emerges as a symbol of nature's untamable, primal power. It is a 7-foot-tall rejection of our attempts to pave over, fence in, and control the natural world. It is the avatar of a wilderness that is pushing back. More than that, the Dogman serves the same function the werewolf has served for centuries. It is a mirror for the beast within humanity itself. The creature is described as having a terrifying blend of human intelligence and animal savagery. It is a walking representation of our own capacity for violence, our own predatory instincts, lurking just beneath a thin veneer of civilization. The stories of its rage and its cunning resonate because we recognize, on some deep, instinctual level, that same potential within our own species. And finally, in a world we believe to be fully mapped, measured, and explained by science, the Dogman represents the terrifying and secretly thrilling possibility that we are wrong. It is a living piece of the unknown, a walking question mark in a culture that demands answers. It is a symbol of the unsettling idea that mystery still has a place in the world, whether we want it to or not. It is also possible that the Dogman phenomenon is best understood not as a search for a physical creature, but as the study of a living, breathing piece of modern folklore. In centuries past, legends like this would spread slowly, carried from village to village by travelers, changing slightly with each retelling. The process was organic, taking generations to form a cohesive myth. Today, that process has been accelerated to an incredible speed by technology. The internet has become a digital campfire, a global gathering place where a single story can be shared, debated, analysed, and amplified by millions in an instant. Online forums, podcasts, and video channels have created a vast collaborative space where individual, anecdotal sightings are collected and woven into a single, overarching narrative. This creates a powerful feedback loop. The more the story is told, the more real it feels. The more real it feels, the more people who have a strange, unexplained experience in the woods are likely to interpret it through the lens of the Dogman legend. A fleeting glimpse of a bear, a strange howl in the night. These ambiguous events are now given a name and a context. They become another entry in the growing case file. In this way, the Dogman has become one of the first great myths of the digital age. Its power now lies not just in the original sightings, but in the massive, self-perpetuating narrative that has been built around them. The story itself has become the phenomenon. The legend is now as real and perhaps as powerful as the creature it seeks to describe. But to dismiss the entire phenomenon as a metaphor or a modern folk tale is to ignore the most crucial element of the story, the witnesses themselves. It is easy, from the safety of a well-lit room, to theorize about archetypes and digital folklore. It is much harder to dismiss the raw, unshakable terror in the voice of a person who genuinely believes they came face to face with a monster. The people who report these encounters are very often the least likely to invent such a story. They are truckers, hunters, police officers, and ordinary families. They are pragmatic, grounded people who, in many cases, had never even heard of the Dogman legend before their own terrifying encounter. They often report their experience at great personal cost, facing ridicule from their communities and struggling with the deep psychological trauma of what they saw. Their lives are often permanently altered. They lose their love for the outdoors. They live with a newfound fear of the dark. They are haunted by the memory of intelligent, non-human eyes staring back at them. So we must ask a final, critical question. Is it more likely that hundreds of credible, stable, and unconnected people across a continent are all misidentifying bears or suffering from the exact same, highly specific hallucination? Or is it possible that they are, in fact, all describing something real that we simply do not yet understand? To dismiss their testimony entirely is an act of intellectual arrogance. The sincerity of the witnesses demands that the question of the Dogman, at the very least, remain open. In the end, we are left at the edge of the woods, staring into the darkness, with no definitive answer. The Dogman file is a paradox. It is a collection of powerful, consistent stories with no physical proof, and a set of rational explanations that do not account for the clarity and conviction of the testimony. Perhaps the true nature of the Dogman is not meant to be a solved case. Perhaps its power, the very reason for its endurance, lies in its unknowability. It represents the humbling truth that our maps are not complete. That even in the 21st century, there are still vast, wild places that hold secrets. The creature is a living embodiment of the unknown, a 7-foot-tall question mark that haunts the periphery of our modern world. The stories serve as a powerful reminder. A reminder that the world is still larger, stranger, and more mysterious than we believe. A reminder that for all our technology and all our knowledge, we are still just visitors in a wilderness that is ancient, powerful, and ultimately indifferent to our understanding of it. The file on the Dogman cannot be closed with a satisfying conclusion because the story is not over. As long as there are dark roads, deep woods, and brave witnesses willing to tell their stories, the legend will continue to grow. The mystery, for now, remains. The book closes on our investigation. The stories have been told, the evidence weighed, the theories considered. We are left with no body, no proof, only a haunting and persistent question. The Dogman remains a shadow, a creature defined not by what we know, but by the terrifying possibility of what we don't. If you believe these forgotten histories, these strange legends, and these darker corners of our past are worth preserving. If you want to help us keep this archive alive, then you can do so by liking this video and subscribing to the Midnight Archives. Your support keeps the candle lit and allows us to keep opening the pages of this book. This file is closed, but when the woods grow dark and the night is deep, remember the stories told here. And beware the beast at the tree line.